Good evening, friends. Welcome back to one of the most prestigious program, that is Neurological Society and Neurological and Equilibrium Society webinars, international webinars actually on Vertigo. This 14th program, we did continuously, credibly, and with great this thing consistency. Okay, and also it was part of Otology Ninja program. So 27th class of Otology Ninja program, and this is a concluding session
Rina,
the NES program. Hence,
Rina,
hereby I invite Dr.
Rina.
Amit Goyal, and he is also immediate past president of.
પછી હમણાં કશું જ નહીં થાય.
Sir, please mute everyone else.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, okay. Okay. I welcome Dr. Amit Goyal, additional professor at All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Jodhpur. Dr. Amit, it's all yours now. Okay. I will let me unmute you. Give me a minute. Yeah. Yeah, Dr. Amit, go ahead. And
I have done that. I have done that.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. So, good evening, all. It gives me immense pleasure to moderate the session. It's a 14th in a row. A really commendable job for NES to go global, and it's 14th in a row for these webinars, which are well attended all the time and have got variety of topics right from basics to advanced ones. So we have discussed many things, and now it comes to an area where we have still untouched sort of thing in the last 13 months, that is surgery for vertigo. So as we all know, when these all non-invasive treatments they fail, sometimes we need to resort to this treatment, surgical treatments, and we have Dr. Sampath, a well-known figure, who will be speaking, but he's got some problems. By that time, our esteemed panelists are Dr. Bhavin Parikh from Baroda, Dr. Kapil Sikka from AIIMS, New Delhi, and Dr. Pawan Singhal from SMS Medical College, Jaipur. So in the meantime, till Dr. Sampath joins, fixes his problem and joins back, I invite Dr. Bhavin Parikh to share his vast experience on vestibular neurectomy. He is a well-known figure in this field. He did his completed his PG from Baroda, and after that he has got experience with his training with Dr. Mahadavai and Dr. Vijayendra in the skull base area. And after completion of fellowship, he was selected for scholarship to attend one of the best otology and skull base centers in France, and under Professor Jack Manion. He has got the privilege to co-author 2 books, one with Dr. Mahadavaiya and one with Dr. Jack Manion. And he has got a vast experience, including publications also. And vestibular neurectomy, I think he is a very well-known figure. I welcome and invite you, Dr. Bhavin Parikh, to share your experience with us. Dr. Bhavin Parikh.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you to Team NES, Dr. Amit, Dr. Pawan, Dr. Prahlad sir. Unfortunately, the main part of indications for surgery is to be taken up by Dr. Sampath. So he will catch up with us. My role is to discuss the role of vestibular nerve section for incapacitating vertigo due to Meniere's disease, which is not controlled medically. So not all the patients will require surgery, as we all know. Probably less than 2 to 3 per 100 of Meniere's disease patient will go for surgery. So I will discuss which patients will require surgery, what are the options available, and the role particularly of vestibular nerve section in this spectrum of vertigo. The main indication is Meniere's disease, so I will focus myself only on Meniere's disease. The other indications will be taken up by Dr. Sampath Rao in his lecture. So we start with the presentation. So as we all know, vertigo is always caused by asymmetrical vestibular input. If the asymmetrical input is a one-time input, like in BPPV or vestibular neuritis, usually the problem is solved because of either treating the disease or because of excellent central compensation. The only disease which keeps on causing paroxysmally the loss of vestibular input and then regaining again partially is most commonly is Meniere's disease, and second is migraine. So these are the two diseases which keeps on disturbing the vestibular activity and causing asymmetry. So thus it does not allow the central compensation to happen. So this is a small animation which shows our normal vestibular system, where both the sides are equal, both the inputs to this is cerebellum, and this is the vestibular systems of both sides, and this is the eye which will show the nystagmus. So what happens when there is complete loss of vestibular function on one side? There will be a nystagmus towards the healthy side. There will be no central compensation initially, and which time in diseases like vestibular neuritis, the cerebellar clamping happens and the vestibular nucleus, there is reprogramming of the vestibular nucleus, and there is a permanent compensation, and thus patient is cured of his vertigo. But now there is this particular situation when the areflexia of vestibular system regains, like in after acute episode of Meniere's disease, the patient regains the vestibular activity, and this leads to again rebalancing of the central compensation, cerebellar clamping and vestibular nucleus balancing. So patient will have nystagmus on the opposite side towards the affected side. So if this keeps on happening again and again, there is no cure. Neither the vestibular system helps in solving the problem, neither the central compensation helps in solving the problem. Medicines will help in preventing this asymmetry, but in certain patients, despite of medicines, despite of all the medical treatment, sometimes this vestibular decompensation keeps on happening again and again, and that is when we have to think about surgery. So all the patients of Meniere's disease have to have optimum medical management. Like the most important is discussing with the patient about the disease, the lifestyle modifications, management of acute attacks, and prevention by maintenance therapy of beta-histine and some antidiuretic like Diamox or Aldactone. This will work in, see what we have, prevalence of Meniere's disease is around 15 per 1 lakh. So this medical management will help in controlling vertigo for long term in at least 10 out of these 15 patients. But at least 1/3 of the patients will not be managed by conservative management. That is, if you see over long term, like 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, for 1 to 2 years, medical management will give an optimal treatment. And for more than 3 to 5 years, it will give an optimal treatment in up to 70% of patients. But there will be patients who will progress further and will not be able to be managed by medical treatment. And that is when we have different options of destructive or non-destructive procedures. So the first of it is an endolymphatic sac surgery. Then there are ablative treatments and non-ablative injections like gentamicin and steroid injections. Then there is a hearing preservation ablative surgery like vestibular nerve section, and finally hearing destroying vestibular ablation like labyrinthectomy. I will not go into all the treatment options. Sampath will give us the view of all the possible options. So I have to highlight what is the role of this vestibular nerve section in the entire gamut of treatment available for this vestibular for Meniere's disease. So if we see and if we compare different ablative techniques, as we saw in the animation, if we cannot control the disease, the second best option is to take help of the central compensation by ablating the peripheral vestibular activity. These are the different ways to ablate the most common and ideal treatment it at present is gentamicin. But the gentamicin injections, there is a huge literature and there is a variety of treatment options with gentamicin. Whether to give on, initially it was given on daily basis, then it came to be given as a weekly option. And lastly, now most of the centers prefer a monthly option. So this is steroid injections usually work for short term, but over long term, there is very high rate of recurrence. So though the hearing risk is minimal, less. So the main option for non-invasive ablative treatment is either a low dose gentamicin, which I call as the monthly maximum 2 injections, or a high dose gentamicin, which I call as a weekly injection of 2 to 6 injections. If you give a low dose gentamicin, the problem is high recurrence rate of 20 to 25%. And if you keep on giving in on demand again and again, it remains no more a low dose gentamicin, but a high dose gentamicin. So it is usually the first choice if the medical treatment fails. But if you give a low dose gentamicin with preservation of hearing, which is possible in up to 92% of patients with low dose gentamicin, the recurrence rate is very high. And if you give high dose gentamicin, the permanent cure of vertigo is up to 85 to 90%, but there is around 10% recurrence, and there is a moderate risk of hearing loss. And in both this gentamicin therapy, the progressive hearing loss of Meniere's disease could not be arrested. We are just curing vertigo, but we are not arresting hearing loss in all the patients. A significant number of patients will have hearing loss arrested. The other option, as we discussed, was labyrinthectomy, which has a very high success rate, a permanent cure of vertigo, but at the cost of hearing loss. So the only option where we can have everything, a minimal hearing loss, very high success rate, and a permanent cure, is vestibular nerve section. But unfortunately, the disadvantage is it's an invasive procedure. It's a surgery compared to gentamicin. So European Academy has suggested the treatment options like starting from medical management, then a low dose gentamicin therapy, and for selective patients which fails gentamicin therapy, a vestibular nerve section. And those patients who opt for vestibular nerve sections for the purpose of hearing preservation, you can directly opt for vestibular nerve section. It has the highest success rate with best hearing preservation. So coming to vestibular nerve section, now you can do vestibular nerve sections by 3 approaches: a middle fossa approach, a retrolabyrinthine approach, and a retrosigmoid approach. As you notice, in all the 3 approach, you have to cross dura to enter the CP angle. And the most direct approach, according to me, is a retrosigmoid approach, because once you enter the cerebellopontine angle, the first nerve that you see into the cerebellopontine angle is vestibulocochlear nerve. And if you see, the superior part is the vestibular nerve and the inferior part is the cochlear nerve. It is well demarcated by a small capillary. The color of the nerves, cochlear and vestibular nerves, are different. There is a distinct plane of separation between vestibular and cochlear nerve. So this propagation that vestibular nerve section causes hearing loss is a complete abnormal proposition, because this is the only way to preserve hearing. By preserving the cochlear nerve, patient is capable of having a cochlear implant in future if they require. And if you see the experience of Professor Manian's department, out of 519 vestibular neurotomies before 2008, after that there are much more number, none of the patient had facial palsy, none of the patient had complete hearing loss, and no permanent morbidity. I have been to this department. These surgeries done by senior residents. All the good senior residents who passed from his department would have done 2 to 3 vestibular nerve sections themselves. So it's a resident-based program, and even in the resident-based program, they have never had in last 35 to 40 years of complete facial palsy or complete hearing loss. So to propagate vestibular nerve section as a hearing ablative surgery or causing very big complication is a wrong thing. But after all, it is a surgery, so you can always have an option of gentamicin before going for surgery. But it is not a surgery where we are going to destroy everything. No, it is to selectively destroy the vestibular function so that the central compensation can help in curing the Meniere's disease. This is the only procedure in the entire gamut of procedures available for Meniere's disease where the patient is cured of the disease. The hearing loss progression stops, vertigo goes away completely, the chance for bilateral Meniere's reduces drastically. So there are multiple advantages. The only disadvantage is it's a surgery. But as ENT surgeons, we are also a surgeon and not only physicians. And for all the other diseases like acoustic neuroma, trigeminal neuralgia, or like head and neck cancers, there are always non-surgical options available. But we have to balance which patient will gain more from surgery and which patient will not gain from surgery, or where a less aggressive approach is available. My experience of 10 patients in last 7 years, I also did not have any facial weakness or complete loss of hearing. The only morbidity in one patient I had was a CSF leak, which was solved by resuturing. So it's like any other surgery, like otosclerosis surgery, there are risks, but the risks are much less compared to the gains. And there are certain patients which will definitely benefit from this surgery. So when should we do surgery for Meniere's disease? When the patient has a definite Meniere's disease by AO-HNS criteria, the medical treatment has failed, which will take at least around 3 years. And there should be a significant disability to the patients. I will discuss what were the disabilities to my patients. The impairment of hearing, the hearing should be relatively good, and the professional status, because it depends. Patients who are wanting to preserve their hearing, who wants to stop their disease permanently, they will have this option. So coming to my experience of 10 cases, all the patient had at least 1 year of medical therapy. Average was 3 years. And as you can see, only 2 patients came from 100 kilometer of radius where I work. So it is not so common to do surgery. In 7 years, only 2 patients from my city. The other 8 patients came from far off, 300, 400 kilometers. So they were patients who were really requiring surgery, who were not benefiting from medical treatment. 5 of these 10 patients had gentamicin intratympanic injections, 4 to 8 injections. So they were the patient who were not responding to gentamicin also. And I have given more than 70 patients, I had given gentamicin. Only 5 of them did not get benefit from gentamicin. Though lot of them would have some hearing loss, about 10 to 15 decibel hearing loss, and sometimes over next 5 to 7 years, more than that, but they got benefit from gentamicin. But 5 of these 70 patients did not, they got benefit for first 2 to 4 years. Most of these patients came back to me after gentamicin after 3 to 4 years, getting recurrent episodes of vertigo, same like before. So 3 of these patients were very young, less than 40 years of age. 3 of these patients came with their relatives telling me that they are having suicidal tendency because of the vertigo. They have lost their job, or they cannot do even their home function. They cannot go alone outside the house. One person was falling off the roads, and he will sleep anywhere on the road once he start having vertigo. So this disease is really incapacitating in certain patients. So this patient requires a permanent solution to their problem. And those patients, 5 of my patients were without gentamicin trial. They selected surgery when they were explained the pros and cons of gentamicin and surgery. And these patients were mostly very young patients. One patient, as I told, had CSF leak, but otherwise there was no major complication in the 10 patient that I had experienced. So coming to the salient point of vestibular nerve section is it has to be done in patient with an incapacitating disorder, which have severe incapacitating vertigo, which make them lose their job, or they stop doing their job, or they reduce their professional activities, or they lose their job because of this. They stop driving, they reduce driving, they cannot go alone in a car. So these are some of the things which is increasing the morbidity and quality of life. It is not at all causing mortality, but a significant reduction in quality of life. And we have this surgery which has a very high success rate. The other feature is it is safe for facial and cochlear now. It is very wrong to say that it will cause facial palsy or complete hearing loss. This is the surgery which prevents further hearing loss. This is one of the hypotheses, but it has been proven by papers, mainly from Professor Manian School and some other papers from Silverstein also, that if you see the preoperative hearing, immediate post-operative hearing, there is some improvement at lower frequencies, but over 5 years also, there is not much worsening of the hearing. It is compared to the normal population, it has the same worsening in the hearing. And most of the patient, if we can preserve the hearing between 50 to 60 decibel, in future they can use hearing aid. If for any reason they require cochlear implant other than Meniere's disease also, they will be ideal candidate for cochlear implant. Other surgeries like labyrinthectomy will either you have to do immediate cochlear implant, but in future you cannot do anything for them. So how do they preserve hearing? There is a hypothesis that there is Putz bundle, that is the afferent cochlear nerve travels through the vestibular nerve and enters the cochlea at the most proximal part near the fundus. So when you cut vestibular nerve, you also cut the efferent cochlear bundle, and this efferent cochlear bundle is responsible for hearing fluctuation and hydrops. So by cutting vestibular nerve, you are preventing further hearing loss to the cochlea. And this is a controversial thing, but this is proven by Michel Lapour, which he is a very famous vestibular rehabilitationist in the team of Professor Manian. And he observed that worldwide, if you say bilateral Meniere's disease, it is common in up to 15 to 25% of patients if you follow them for long time, for 18 to 20 years. So when he observed his patients who had undergone vestibular nerve section, only 6 cases out of 316 cases of nerve section with mean interval of 8 years, that is only 2% of patients had bilateral Meniere's. And this comes from a team which has some of the best vestibular rehabilitationist, best surgeon, and they are the team who have introduced video nystagmography to the world. So they have a very good physiology lab also. So they came out, they don't know how it has happened, but by cutting unilateral vestibular nerve, you are preventing bilateral Meniere's disease. They don't have explanation for them this, but it is from their data that they have come up. And what they say is that the new vestibular nucleus causes a new pathway into the vestibulocerebellar pathway which prevents bilateral Meniere's disease. They don't know how exactly. So summarizing, this is a most effective treatment. It is safe regarding facial nerve, and the surgery is safe compared to any other surgeries, and it is safe for hearing and contralateral ear. So I have a video. Is Sampath ready, or shall I show the video? Prahlad sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. You can go ahead with it.
Yeah. So this is a video showing the vestibular nerve section. So if you see, the position is our normal autologic position with head flex and rotated towards opposite side. We have surface landmarks like Frankfurt panes and landmarks for sigmoid sinus. So we have surface landmarks which shows sigmoid sinus and transverse sinus, and then we draw a line from mastoid tip, which is 3 finger breadth behind the postauricular sulcus. We elevate subcutaneous and skin flap, which is anterosuperiorly based, and then musculoperiosteal flap, which is postero-inferiorly based. So this form double breasting. These all steps are to prevent postoperative CSF leak. Then we identify the emissary vein. We make a circular craniotomy with keeping the emissary vein in the center, and the emissary vein, if we follow, it will take us to sigmoid sinus. So our craniotomy has to be, so we can see this is the right side. This is sigmoid sinus has been identified here. This is superior, this is inferior, this is anterior, and this is posterior. So we have made a coin size craniotomy based anteriorly on sigmoid sinus. And once you have made a craniotomy, then we make a anteriorly based dural flap. So anteriorly U-shaped flap, which is based anteriorly on sigmoid sinus. So we incise the dura with 11 number knife, and then slowly elevate this dura with the attached arachnoid. Before incising the dura, we ask the anesthetist to do hyperventilation so that it will cause a very good cerebellar relaxation. And this is the only technique which we use to relax the cerebellum and enter into the CP angle. So we are making, so we have made a anteriorly based dural flap has been sutured to the surrounding soft tissue. Now we are entering into the CP angle. This is the arachnoid, which we have to dissect with the help of sharp and blunt dissection. We are protecting the cerebellum by putting patties over it, surgical patties over it. This is a small subarcuate artery which is entering into the subarcuate canal. So we can easily coagulate this. This is harmless. And then we can sharply cut the arachnoid and retract the arachnoid. You can have a glimpse of cochleovestibular nerve in the center. So as soon as you enter CP angle, the first thing in the center of the CP angle is vestibulocochlear nerve. So you have to dissect the arachnoid out of our field so that we can work easily. This is the needle, and with sharp dissection with needle and scissor, we can cut this arachnoid. I will go a little fast. So then once we have dissected, this is the trigeminal nerve. This is the flocculus. You can see the superior part is vestibular nerve and the cochlear nerve is the inferior part. Here we cannot identify, but usually the cochlear nerve is more white, the vestibular nerve is grayish, and you can identify the plane of dissection between cochlear and vestibular nerve. It is much more clearer in three-dimensional view with microscope, but you have to find the ideal plane between vestibular and cochlear nerve. There are certain nerve monitors which can help to identify exactly which nerve fiber is vestibular nerve fiber and which nerve fiber is cochlear nerve fiber. But at present in India, we are not using that. But individual nerve fiber, we can identify whether it belongs to cochlear nerve or vestibular nerve. But the anatomical dissection is good enough in more than 98% of cases. So you dissect the vestibular cochlear nerve. If you see, the facial nerve will be behind the cochlear nerve inferiorly. And as you go more laterally, it will come behind the vestibular nerve. But if you make the dissection at the lower 1/3 part, then the facial nerve is quite protected by the cochlear nerve. This is the final, see, you can see the nerve, the cochlear and vestibular nerve separately. You should not leave any nerve fibers of cochlear, vestibular nerve attached, because that will not cause 100% deafferentation. You have to cause 100% deafferentation. And now with a blunt probe, I am just demonstrating the nervous intermedius. This is nervous intermedius. Can you see? This is nervous intermedius, which again protects the facial nerve. And behind the nervous intermedius is the facial nerve. So there are various things nature has provided to protect facial nerve. And cochlear nerve, if you find a right plane, you cannot completely cut the cochlear nerve unless you cut off the blood supply of cochlear nerve. Otherwise, so this is the want to start retrosigmoid approach or CP angle surgery. This is the most basic surgery because you go in, cut the nerve, and come out. So you compared to vestibular schwannoma or microvascular decompression surgery, this is relatively easy. You require a learning curve, but once you require learning curve for any surgeries. But once you learn properly, the results are quite good, and this can be one of the options for patients with Meniere's disease. We suture the dura by intermittent silk sutures. We put a small dura patch behind the incision to prevent CSF leak, and then we cover the gap with free fibrofatty tissue glue, Surgicel, and then we cover this defect with the bone pate that we have collected while drilling the craniotomy, and then suture the soft tissue in 2 layers, and then finally this is the incision is almost as much size as our common post-auricular incision. So thank you. This is my book with Professor Manian, which mentions apart from vestibular nerve sections on other surgeries like microvascular decompression and small acoustic neuroma. So thank you again to the team NES, and we can take questions if Sampath is not ready, or as the
I think before Sampath starts, there are just 2 or 3 quick questions. So
Yeah.
maybe I'll just pass them directly to you. The most commonly asked question is that is it only an observation or does it have some scientific basis when you say that the unilateral vestibular neurectomy actually halts the disease process? It doesn't let the disease go bilateral. It doesn't let the hearing deteriorate further.
No, there are papers on hearing deterioration. It is not an observation. It's long-term studies that have been published that vestibular nerve section prevents hearing, continuous hearing loss on the same side. The hypothesis is not clear, but the hypothesis, as I told, is cutting the efferent cochlear bundle. But regarding the bilateral Meniere's disease, it has not come from multiple centers. It has come only from Professor Manian Center. But hearing is preserved after vestibular nerve section is not an hypothesis. It has been proven by multiple centers. But nowadays, very few centers in the world is doing this surgery. The almost entire United States have stopped doing surgery, probably because of medical legal reason. But in Europe, in France, there are at least 100 ENT surgeons who are doing vestibular nerve section.
So now my next question is related to this only. It means you are saying due to medical legal reasons. So one question will be that are you doing it without a neurosurgeon or you are doing it with neurosurgeon?
I do my all CP angle surgeries with neurosurgeon in his center. But this surgery I do myself alone. But there is always his name in the paper, but it can be done alone.
Great. So the second question actually is the reason medical legal that in US this surgery is actually stopped being done, or there is one observation. I think Dr. Suratwala has asked that you should go for endolymphatic sac decompression first rather than straightway jumping onto the vestibular neurectomy. So what will be your take on that?
Yeah. See, Meniere's disease is full of controversy. So there is never going to be an end to the controversy, where to start and where to end, because some people are having very good result with endolymphatic sac surgery, but none of the surgeries have success rate as high as 98%. Only labyrinthectomy has such a high success rate. So if patient is ready to go undergo endolymphatic sac surgery, the success rate reported all over the world is around 60 to 65%. And that is also a surgery. This is also a surgery. The risk for endolymphatic sac surgery can also be a hearing loss. So then it depends, comes down to, I think, to your training. So whether you have done endolymphatic sac surgery very commonly and you have got good results, but I am sure none of the endolymphatic sac surgeon will say that they have got success rate above 95%. So if patient is ready to undergo one more surgery before final result, and if he is lucky, he can go away with. So if you remember, I have shown my steps. After medical management, some people keep endolymphatic sac surgery before gentamicin, some of them keep after gentamicin. But endolymphatic sac surgery is full of controversy, as you will agree.
So let me pass this question to Dr. Kapil Sikka maybe. And in continuation to this question, Dr. Amit Keshri has asked that if you need to choose between vestibular nerve section and labyrinthectomy, so what will you choose? Because there are interconnections between cochlear and vestibular nerves, and apparently you are actually severing those the fibers of cochlear nerve also when you are doing vestibular nerve section.
But
So
they are
Dr.
efferent
Kapil,
vessel, not afferent.
Dr. Kapil, if you can, Dr. Prahlad,
Yeah,
if
one
you can
minute.
unmute.
Yeah,
Dr. Kapil.
1 minute. Yeah, 1 minute. Kapil ji, welcome. You can start your video also.
Video,
Hi, Dr. Amit. Can you hear me?
Yeah, please.
Yes.
we can't see you.
Kapil ji, you can start your video
Yeah,
also.
Kapil is
Yeah,
seen
Kapil,
now.
please.
Welcome, Kapil
Go ahead.
ji.
So Kapil,
So it was a good talk, Dr. Bhavin. I really enjoyed this. So the question turns out to be, what is treatment of choice? As we have already discussed about the nerve section, the
Kapil,
the
can you
sac
stop your video?
decompression, and not discussed about labyrinthectomy. So if you ask me about
the Kapil, I think Amit Boss is suggesting, because there is some interruption in your speech, in your voice. So you can
Please switch
switch
off your
off the video
video.
and
You can
just
switch off
on
video.
the audio, like you continue with the audio. Yeah,
so can you hear me, sir?
Yeah,
yeah.
that's better.
So, sir, actually, if you ask me the choice of surgery, I would agree with Bhavin that if you have to do surgery, then probably vestibular nerve section is more physiological. It is it describes the disease treatment in a better way. It is probably, I would say, easier to do and more sure shot way of achieving vertigo control as compared to the sac decompression operation. My institute, we do not have much experience now. I think it was done in the past with the sac decompression, but we are also for total surgical labyrinthectomy, and that is a very effective procedure for the prolonged vertigo control in cases that are not handled medically.
So how do you rate
Yeah.
this, Amit Boss?
Yeah,
There is a
yeah.
query. Like he is going in favor of total like labyrinthectomy, the more ablative procedure as compared to vestibular neuronectomy.
So, can you just put some more focus, Kapil, why you really want to go for labyrinthectomy? Kapil,
Kapil, you can unmute yourself, I think.
so maybe Pawan, you till the time I think he's back. Yeah, Kapil.
Yeah, sir.
Can you just
So,
throw some more light why you choose this labyrinthectomy over?
Labyrinthectomy over vestibular neuronectomy.
Labyrinthectomy is nowhere a neurosurgical procedure. It is fairly straightforward. Just requires a bit of knowledge of labyrinth, and adequate labyrinthectomy is a ENT professional's job. That's why I would probably prefer this. But yes, if you have a good neurosurgical backup and a good center, I think a nerve section is a more sure shot way of treating it. But in our hand, labyrinthectomy is a very effective operation, probably as effective as nerve section.
Sure.
So, there was one question, Dr. Bhavin. Does it have any effect on tinnitus, as you have observed?
No. It is same like gentamicin. In some of the patient it improves, in some of the patient it remains same, and in very few it may worsen. But usually it is either same. It does not improve with surgery.
Okay. So, is Sampath ready? Sampath, are you there?
I'll unmute Sampath. Give me a minute. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Sampath is back. Okay.
We'll figure out. Bye.
The rest of the questions we will definitely take after Sampath's talk. Maybe there are a lot more questions coming up, and all those can be taken collectively. So that I think let's hear to if Sampath is ready, we can hear him first.
Sampath, you can share your screen. Yeah.
Till Dr. Sampath arranges his presentation, let me take the opportunity to introduce him. As we all know, Dr. Sampath, he is based in Bangalore right now, and he's got very huge experience in skull-based surgeries. He did his master's at Mangalore, and the fellow of European Board of Examinations also he is cleared, and European Academy of Otology and Neurotology. He was awarded the British Annual Congress in Otolaryngology Bako Fellowship twice, and Birla Smarak Kosh Fellowship and the GSE Fellowships of Rotary International, and 10 outstanding Indian awards from Junior Chambers International. He's completed his 2 years fellowship in skull-based surgeries and advanced otology at Casa di Cura, Piacenza, Italy, and awarded fellowship for European Academy of Neurotology. He continued to work in Italy with Mario Sana, Jack Manian, and Paolo Castelnuovo for a total of 6.5 years, accumulating vast experience in skull-based surgery. He has over 100 peer-reviewed scientific publications with H-index of 19, and that's huge, I believe. And 15 chapters in various textbooks, and 1 textbook on cochlear and other auditory implants by Theme Publications. He is recipient of Best Paper Award at the Polydor Society meeting of 2013. He was awarded with an honorary fellow of American College of Surgeons, FACS, in 2019, and a visiting professorship to the Shanghai Jiao Tong University, one of the Asia's largest universities. He is an invited faculty at the World Federation of Skull-Based Societies and European Skull-Based Congresses. He was also honored with the Dr. G.S. Grewal Oration by AOI in 2018 and Professor Alauddin Memorial Oration in 17th Conference of ORL HNS of Society of Otolaryngologists at Bangladesh. The Karnataka ENT Oration in 2019 and Professor S.R. Singh Orishan at UP State ENT Conference in 2019. He has been invited to the skull-based courses organized by the World Federation of Neurosurgical Societies and has been invited speakers at national conferences of Italian, Egyptian, Turkish, Saudi, Bangladeshi, UAE, and Indian societies. He has pioneered many new concepts in skull-based surgery in India. He is founder of World Skull-Based, an international organization and an NGO. The World Skull-Based Fellowship Diplomas in Skull-Based Surgery offered by World Skull-Based in Bangalore are the first curriculum-based skull-based courses in India that are awarded a university diploma in skull-based, and I think it's really commendable because for ENT surgeons it may open a legal way, probably a way ahead for at least starting skull-based surgeries to I have seen him operating. He has got unmatchable patience for hours together. He can just keep on operating with, and the meticulous surgeries he does, that's a treat to eyes. So that's about Dr. Sampath, and if he's ready, we can have the pleasure of hearing him. So is he here? In the meantime, I think let's take few more questions to keep the ball rolling. So Dr. Kapil, Dr. Pawan, Dr. Bhavin Parekh, Dr. Amit Keshri, Dr. Prahlad, all of you are here.
Yeah.
So let's Dr. Amit Keshri, can you throw some light on risk of hearing loss while doing labyrinthectomy? Amit, are you there?
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So-
Actually, in labyrinthectomy, we will lose hearing anyway, because hearing will be gone as soon as you will destroy the labyrinth. In vestibulonerectomy, we can preserve hearing in most of the cases. So that is the difference. But according to the literature which I have assessed few days back, the labyrinthectomy has more effective than vestibulonerectomy, because as we have already, Dr. Bhavin Parekh has commented that there is an interconnection. So this interconnection also lead to not 100% results in vestibulonerectomy as compared to labyrinthectomy. But the labyrinthectomy patient, on the other hand, have some problem in compensation in initial few weeks. Although the vestibulonerectomy patient has no issues, much of the issues with compensation because of the vestibular nerve section. So, I mean, anybody would like to comment? Yes.
Just a way I can comment. There is only a one-way interconnection between cochlear nerve and vestibular nerve. Some of the fibers from cochlear vestibular nerve goes to cochlear nerve, but none of the fibers from cochlear nerve goes to vestibular nerve. So if you cut, you are cutting the cochlear nerve fibers efferent, but not the vestibular nerve. The difference in result might be less than 1% between labyrinthectomy and nerve section, because if you leave behind some vestibular nerve fibers on the cochlear nerve, then you are not doing a complete deafferentation. But if you do labyrinthectomy, you are completely destroying vestibule and the peripheral organ. So that is why a small difference, but that difference is less than 1 or 2%. But that is at the peripheral level, at not the nerve level.
Okay. Right. I mean, there was one paper, that's why I quoted.
Yeah.
There is I mean, apart from that, there may be interconnection or not. I don't know. I mean,
Pawan, you can chip in, please.
A small idea just flashed to my mind right now about the hearing preservation there in labyrinthectomy. Can't we do something like a subtotal labyrinthectomy? We just leave the saccule down there. We drill the semicircular canals, do the utricle, which is posteriorly located, posterior-superiorly located, and we clog the opening between the utricle and saccule there. We just do something like that. Could we preserve that? I've just flashed this idea flashed to my mind.
People have tried doing this for acoustic neuroma surgery to preserve hearing,
Yes.
but the success rate is very less.
Okay.
But people have tried for acoustic neuroma. They do labyrinthectomy by plugging the semicircular canals and preventing fluid,
Yes.
perilymph and endolymph loss. But the success rate is very low.
So there are a couple more crazy people like me to think about.
Yeah.
Okay.
So partial labyrinthectomy has been quite described. You can just selectively attack. It is, you can say, slightly more than the chemical labyrinthectomy, where you selectively destroy the utricle and saccule, the organs that are probably contributing more to the hydrops pathology. And in case the hearing is destroyed, then theoretically you can even do a cochlear implant. But I would say for the audience here that
Yes.
most of these
Hello, who is this?
reports are anecdotal. It should not be considered
yes.
that the
हाँ,
hearing
बोलिए.
preservation with labyrinthectomy is the treatment of choice, and so is the nerve section.
I
So
think
if you are embarking on surgeries, you should select the patients very, very carefully. Most of the surgeons will agree with me that the surgery they are doing are mostly in the cases who have got unsalvageable hearing. So even if it's a labyrinthectomy or a nerve section or a sac decompression, you will hardly take up a patient who has a normal or near normal hearing. Most of the cases we will do surgery if the patient has significant degree of hearing loss.
No,
non-serviceable hearing
actually,
loss.
no, it is not a non-serviceable hearing. Sorry. The
So
point is usually
how many patients of your nerve section experience had normal hearing?
no one will have normal. But if you can preserve that between 50 to 60 decibel compared to 80 to 90 decibel, it is much better.
70 decibels in 1 year with other year normal is not a serviceable hearing.
Yes.
That's what I want.
Yeah, but you never know what happens in the another year in their lifetime if they are young age.
So I would agree with you that if you have performed a nerve section, then if they lose hearing in future, then probably they still have an option of a cochlear implant in that year or the other year. Contrast from
Yeah, and
labyrinthectomy.
if we can preserve the hearing at 60 decibel level and at 80-90 decibel level, we know you are a cochlear implant surgeon. Now the indication for cochlear implant surgery has come down to 70-80 decibel, but at least it has not come to 60 decibel where we are preserving vestibular nerve section. So to preserve at 60 and 80 is quite different, and to have complete hearing loss is quite different. So for hearing preservation, we should always try if it is possible.
Yeah, Dr. Bhavin, I think.
Sir, my question is, okay. After you.
Can I comment over that?
Yes.
I think Dr. Bhavin, Kapil has got a very valid point. So you can divide your patients accordingly. If a patient has got severe to profound sensory hearing loss already, a severe symptom, I think the best thing to do as an ENT surgeon is labyrinthectomy.
Yeah, definitely. But
because it is in your area. Simultaneously, you can go ahead with a cochlear implantation at the same time. Okay, not much complications there, but if even a bit of serviceable hearing is present there, I would rather say even if it is moderate hearing loss, SN loss, we can prefer vestibular neuronectomy.
And if the hearing loss has been so bad, we can keep on giving gentamicin, because then that is a chemical labyrinthectomy. Why to do a surgical labyrinthectomy? Only when you have to preserve hearing, you have to do something. If you want to destroy hearing, gentamicin is already there.
But Dr. Bhavin, there is another issue there.
Yeah.
That if you are doing a labyrinthectomy, those little number of fibers which are saved there in the cochlea, you can use them for cochlear implantation. That will be giving you a good hearing.
Yeah,
and
but even in
disease, cochlear implant works well.
Yeah, but even in chemical labyrinthectomy, you can.
But in
but in chemical labyrinthectomy also you can do a cochlear implant.
But all these chemicals are all also somehow cochlear toxic.
Yeah, cochlear toxic, but not nerve toxic. Cochlear toxic is no problem. With cochlea, you are replacing the hair cells. You are not damaging the nerve cells.
But if preserved hair cells are there, they are of use.
For cochlear implant, I don't know whether they are.
So actually, there are two extremes of the surgeries. At one point, if you do a endolymphatic sac decompression in hearing preservation, okay. So in last November, our UP State Conference, one such patient was done by Dr. Sampath. And it has been 6 months. Our experience of only 4 cases is that endolymphatic sac decompression also works very well. That patient never required any vestibular sedative in last 9 months. The other situation is that I have done 2 cochlear implant in a patient of Meniere's disease where the disease has died down and the patient has bilateral severe to profound loss. So in that cases, would you recommend a cochlear implant and labyrinthectomy at the same time? Although the patient does not have vertigo, as like earlier, it has died down, but has imbalance. So you will advise a labyrinthectomy together with the cochlear implant or just cochlear implant? Because his main complaint now is the hearing loss.
Kapil boss.
I would say if the patient does not have vertigo, just implant and
Yes.
restore his hearing.
Okay, right.
So I think Sampath is ready.
I'm afraid not got the clearance as yet, but
Sampath is okay. Okay, he's speaking.
Okay. See, Dr. Sampath he is unable to open his PowerPoint yet. I think we should
if Dr.
reschedule his
Sampath can,
event. Yeah.
I think there can be 2 situations. If Dr. Sampath
Hello?
is hearing, he can directly share the videos, and he is an extempore
Hello?
speaker.
Yeah, Sampath.
Yeah, Dr.
Yeah.
Sampath, you are ready?
Hello?
You can say videos. Yes, Sampath, we can listen.
Yeah, are you ready?
Hello?
Sampath,
Sampath, can you hear us? Sampath, hello?
Hello?
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Sampath,
Sampath, hello?
Sampath, you have to unmute yourself.
No, he is unmuted. He's
yes,
not
he is
muted.
unmuted.
Hi, Amit. I can hear you, but I can't. I
We
don't know
can hear
something
you. We are
with the
listening to
Zoom.
you.
I can't hear anybody from Zoom. I'm not.
No, we can listen to you.
Okay.
You are
Okay.
audible.
Let me see. Okay. Okay. You can
just
hear me,
share
no?
your screen
Okay.
and start.
Okay. Okay.
So you can play your videos or something.
No, I think Dr. Sampath is not able to hear our voice, so he's just rejoining. He's just rejoining in a couple of minutes.
Hello? Can you
Yeah.
hear?
Yeah, hello. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Oh my
That's
God.
perfect. That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Right. I'm so sorry, guys. I have a serious problem with my presentation.
It's okay.
Now, my presentation is
Can you
6
open?
GB.
Can you play the videos, Sampath?
What I can do is I can play the videos.
Yeah, right.
But I was going through some of the comments, and lot of it is covered in my presentation. Actually, partial labyrinthectomy, and all the dilemmas that comes with whether labyrinthectomy is necessary, whether CI with CI. So all these issues were covered in my presentation. I would be happy if if I get 1 more day's time to sort this out. The presentation is ready. It's just that it's a very heavy file, and now my laptop is not opening it for some reason. Maybe along with Zoom, it doesn't have enough space or something. I will try to share my screen, and I will show you a couple of.
So are you able to open? I mean, sometime. Hello, Sampath.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can see that.
Sir, Sampath.
Yes.
Sometimes the PowerPoint opens, but it does not come in full screen. So just try opening it. It will not come in the full screen, but we can see the small screen.
I will try. Are you
Yes.
seeing my screen now? Can you see
Yes,
my
yes,
screen?
right now.
yeah, we can see.
Okay,
we can
so
see.
this is the presentation. You see it is 6 GB, 6.86 GB.
Yes, yes.
3-4 very good videos are there. Only thing is, if I click this, it says like this. It just doesn't open. See, it says
Okay.
repair. And when I say repair, it goes. And then I also, meanwhile, while Bhavin was presenting, I tried it on my another laptop, which is a higher end laptop. This also is i7 MacBook Pro. That is i9. I tried in that also. In that also, it is not opening.
Sampath,
Videos.
The thing is, I have introduced you twice already. So what you can do?
Yeah.
So what you can do? You can
show
play some. You
videos.
can show directly videos. Don't open the PowerPoint because it needs repairing. It won't be able to repair 6 GB
And-
PowerPoint right
And
now.
we can
Okay.
discuss
Go
about it
directly to the
later.
videos.
and yeah,
Yeah, we can
Yes.
do everything.
Done.
and you can talk about the presentation directly without PowerPoint.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Done.
let me go to the videos, and
So-
in between we can take the questions and we can discuss as we are going.
Okay. So am I live now with the audience or?
Yes, yes, you are live.
You are live. You are on.
Okay. So I need to exit force quit PowerPoint now for me to be able to do anything. No. Okay. Right. Fine. It doesn't open. I've tried this a million times. After I inserted the last video, it crashed. That was just about 1 hour before. After that, I saved and I tried. Okay. Anyway, let's not cry over spilt milk. So basically, my presentation had, I will try to recollect what was there in my presentation, and hopefully there'll be another opportunity to do this. So the first part dealt with, what are the surgical indications of vertigo? If I remember slide by slide, I'll just briefly go through my slides, as I speak, and then I'll show you the relevant videos, which are just about 3 or 4 videos. Now, is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So the first couple of slides dealt with what are the indications. Now, let's begin with basic. Let's then go to a moderate and then go to skull base. So the basic indications are lateral semicircular canal fistula, perilimb fistulas, semicircular canal dehiscence, and and any third window cochlear fistulas. All these things can give rise to vertigo, and these require surgery because this most likely is going to be long-term vertigo, which doesn't have any medical line of management, I would say. Suppose there is a labyrinthine fistula. This patient is going to suffer because medicines can't, unless you're doing a chemical labyrinthectomy, you're trying to ablate the labyrinth. We are not talking about that. Again, we have several steps when it comes to protocolization of treatment for vertigo. So first, let's talk about simple perilimb fistula and all that. So this perilimb fistula is generally associated with colostoma. When we're talking about colostoma, we need to remove the disease. And we all know for several years, senior ENT surgeons, otologists have dealt with this phenomenon where we are taught how to gradually peel off the colostoma matrix from the fistula and make sure that the fistula is, the labyrinth is not open. Now, in this, there was a very interesting a couple of articles spearheaded by the Japanese ENT surgeon Kobayashi. Now, he was the first to talk about partial occlusion of the semicircular canals. His first paper dealt with about just about I think 8 or 10 cases, and out of that, except for one case, almost all cases got away with absolutely intact hearing when the semicircular canals were partially ablated. Any one of the semicircular canals, lateral was the most common, and posterior semicircular canals also. So it is not always true that the earlier belief that you just open the membranous labyrinth and then the patient will go deaf. If you open it unintentionally, if you open it crassly, crudely, then yes. But if you open it carefully, controlled partial occlusion of the canals will may not lead to total deafness. So that was one thing. Now, semicircular canal dehiscence again is a big topic. So this involves two basic surgeries. So again, we are talking about medical management. So what is medical management in semicircular canal dehiscence? Now, medical management is not really medical, but it's a little surgical, but it's a small surgery. Now, round window occlusion is one of the things tried for semicircular canal dehiscence before we go into the bigger surgeries like middle cranial fossa or the transmastoid approach. Okay. Now, what do you mean by a round window obliteration? Now, in semicircular canal dehiscence, there are 3 windows. We all know that the phenomenon happens due to the third window, which is lack of bone over the semicircular superior semicircular canal arch, most commonly superior semicircular canal arch, on which the dura sits, so that acts as the third window. So out of these 3 windows, you're trying to close one window. So how do you do this? Simply elevate the tympanomeatal flap, put periosteum, and make the round window, which is in the middle ear, more less fluent. You know what I mean is to make it more rigid and to close it using periosteum. Cartilage has also been used to completely occlude the round window. So these have been these are the techniques which you can try before you go into the more radical surgeries, or more, I would say, complex surgery. Not really radical, they are not radical. So then you come to the two options, middle fossa and the transmastoid approaches. So these are the two defined surgeries for vertigo with suprasemicircular canal dehiscence. Now, what is better of the two? Now, when you're talking about, okay, just I'll keep talking, but are you all able to listen once in a way? I'll just ask you if everybody is with me, is the audio okay?
Yeah, everything is fine. Go ahead,
Okay.
please.
So we are talking about middle fossa approach and transmastoid, which are the two preferred options. Now, when you're talking about the middle fossa approach, what are the pros and cons of middle fossa versus pros and cons of transmastoid? Now, transmastoid approach is a straightforward approach. Almost every otologist can do this, whereas middle fossa requires a little bit of a skull-based training. But in today's day, a mini craniotomy is no big deal. I think most ENT surgeons are able to do this, and we don't really need to get the help of a neurosurgeon. A small mini craniotomy at the root of the just above the zygoma, 2 into 3 centimeter, or even a 2 into 2 centimeter small mini craniotomy is enough to elevate if the because all we need to do is identify the superior semicircular canal arch, that is the arcuate eminence. So you don't need to go anywhere beyond this. So an experienced surgeon with the middle fossa, what I mean is experienced with the middle fossa approach and all that, will need a very small mini cranio to go there and to deal with the situation. Now, middle fossa approach has given consistent results for superior semicircular. It's supposed to be a more consistent, it gives consistent results rather than when compared to a transmastoid approach. Transmastoid approach, literature says, gives inconsistent results when it comes. So what do you do transmastoid? What do you do middle fossa? When you're going through the middle fossa approach, you can do two things. One is, if while elevating the dura, if you're careful and if there is no breach of the membranous labyrinth, you can keep a small bit of fascia, and or you can wrap a pliable perichondrium cartilage with perichondrium, and then you can keep it over that, put tissue glue, and make sure that it stays in that area. So that is how you deal with it. Now, if the canal is so dehiscent that when you're elevating the dura will be on the canal and the canal opens, then you have to be able to quickly plug it on both the sides, controlled in a controlled fashion, and then you can do a partial occlusion of the semicircular canal. So these are the two options available. Now, transmastoid, you can do the same thing. You can do a cortical mastoidectomy, do a labyrinthectomy, expose the superior semicircular canal, and then you plug the superior semicircular canal before the, so it has to be done at the just around on either side of the supposed dehiscence. Now this is a problem because in a transmastoid will be a difficult task. So that is the reason why this surgery is not favored versus middle fossa. So what you have to do is actually find the arch and the apex of the arch on where the fistula is supposed to be, and then go and plug, do a small labyrinthotomy, and then immediately plug the two ends of the two arches without disturbing the common crus and the posterior and the lateral semicircular canals. So this is this thing. Now again, with the middle fossa, obviously the admission is longer. You're exposing the dura. The patient has to be in the hospital for a longer period of time. With the cortical mastoidectomy, you can probably discharge the patient over the very next day, or so hospital time is more in middle fossa. Brain retraction is involved, so it requires a little bit of experience. So these are the difference between. But transmastoid approach is easier said than done. It's not always possible to actually sort out the problem that you are seeking to sort out. Now, so that as I remember the slides. So then you come to superior semicircular canal dehiscence, and then you come to the other causes. Now the other cause, and of course there is Meniere's disease. The Meniere's disease is another is one of the most important aspects of surgery for vertigo. Now, before we hit Meniere's, we need to discuss what are the other causes. Now the other causes include tumors of the cerebellopontine angle, fibrous dysplasia, temporal bone tumors, and other things. Okay, so okay, I have a video where what I can show of of a patient who came to me with. Are you seeing my screen?
You're playing with the QuickTime. You're playing with QuickTime video.
No, I will play with VLC.
VLC, na? So you have to share VLC.
I have to share VLC. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
But you're able to see my screen, no? No,
Not
folders are all seen, no?
Not yet. Not yet.
Not
Not yet.
Not yet.
Share screen and then share VLC. Or you can click the you open the file and share directly VLC.
Exactly. Okay. So,
Yeah.
so what I'll do is, so these are all my surgical patients. What I wanted to show you was Petrus bone. Yeah, epidermoid. CP angle epidermoid. This is so funny, you know. I've never done this before. Never happened to me. But yeah, everything's an experience. So CP angle epidermoid here. Okay. Now this patient actually, I'll use the shorter version. Now I think I inserted this file, and that is what led to the crash. Okay. So can you see now? Can you see my presentation?
Not yet. You
Yeah,
have to share the. You have to share the VLC.
I have to share.
Go to new share. Go to new share and share VLC.
Okay. Okay. Just a minute. You stop share, new share, and then the VLC. Okay. Can you see now?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Of course.
Okay. So, so this is a translabyrinthine approach for a cerebellopontine angle epidermoid. Now, this patient came with, this patient was from South Korea, Bangladeshi patient settled in South Korea. This patient came with a history of hearing loss and giddiness. Now, the reason I'm showing this video is to show that giddiness is not always equal, surgery for vertigo need not always equal Meniere's disease. Yes, Meniere's disease is a separate topic. It's an important topic, more commonly dealt with by otologists, so it's in discussion. But there are so many cases of vertigo that come to a skull-based surgeon, and this is one. So this patient had hearing loss, about 60-65 dB hearing loss, and giddiness. Treated medically for several months, maybe a couple of years, and then MRI was done, and it showed a huge cerebellopontine epidermoid. Audiogram showed a 65 dB sensory. So this is audiogram. Okay, 27-year-old male. Now the decision was whether to do a translab or a retrosigmoid. Now retrosigmoid approach, you saw that the hearing loss was about 65 dB. And the MRI showed that the lesion, and you'll see it in the surgery as well, that the lesion is going right up to the fundus of the internal. That is why there is decreased hearing. Now, if it was just a CP angle epidermoid, the pressure on the nerves would not have been so intense, and the hearing loss would not have happened so soon in the progression of the disease. And this patient had giddiness, so it was very evident that it was going into the fundus of the internal meatus. Now, when it's going to the fundus, retrosigmoid, at least in my hands, with hearing preservation in a patient with 65 dB, I can't assure it. So what I thought is I'll do the easier thing, go translab, make sure that it's a fairly big epidermoid, go translab, finish the case nicely, and then do a BAHA. Now these days I do a BAHA with all my, I've done about 12-14 cases, all cases with a single-sided deafness, who end up with a single-sided deafness, get a BAHA in my hands, simultaneous ipsilateral BAHA. Okay. Now this is the approach, a T flap as in a translabyrinthine approach, a classical T incision. The flaps are elevated up to the digastric ridge, the mesenteric vein is closed, and this is again there's some problem with the resolution. Is it pixelated on your screen or is it clear? Is it clear on the screen for you?
A little bit pixelated, but we can make it out.
Okay. Okay. Fine. So you see that there is a nice wide exposure of the post-sigmoid region, the sigmoid sinus, and the dura here. Now your this is again a contracted mastoid. The editors is just opened, and now I'm identifying the facial nerve. Now the reason why I showed this video, there are a few important points. Now one is skull base surgery for vertigo, if, why, and when, and how. Second is there is every step of labyrinthectomy is clearly seen in this video. Okay, and the third thing is you'll see how the lesion goes around the nerves and how it exerts pressure on these nerves, just like in a vascular decompression, microvascular decompression, how it exerts pressure on the facial nerve and the vestibulocochlear nerve, which obviously goes for a toss in this case. So here you see that the largest diamond burr is used to drill over the sigmoid sinus, the sinodural angle, and the middle fossa dura is exposed. And then we move into, okay, so that is a small piece of a very thin piece of bone removed over the sigmoid sinus. The middle fossa dura is also completely decompressed. Skeletonization means removing of the bone. Decompression means completely making it bare. When it comes to, that is the terminology I use when it comes to facial nerve, middle fossa dura, everything. Okay. Now here we are isolating the semicircular canals. Just briefly going into the canals. First, I always identify the facial nerve. Then I go into the canals. So this is briefly skeletonizing the canals. Now I come to the facial nerve. Now, one of the points I wanted to make in my presentation, I had anatomical dissections to show this, is this point where I'm drilling. Now see this point. Now we are talking about the lateral semicircular canal here, the posterior semicircular canal here, and the facial nerve is already more or less seen. Now the point that I always begin and focus is what I call this facial dimple here, which is at the junction between the lateral and posterior canal, just at the junction there. Okay, so the facial nerve is lateral, the lateral semicircular canal is posterior, and inferiorly of this. So this point is where you have to start drilling to actually get to the nail, to nail the facial nerve. So you see, again and again and again, I go to this. Do not fear the lateral canal, because there is a small dimple here which will allow you to drill in that area. So if even in cochlear implantation, I love to begin at this point and then I go into the, see, that is the point. That is exactly the point where I like to drill and expose the facial nerve. Again, this is the posterior canal here, lateral canal is here, superior canal is coming into view. So you see how I drill that area so that now the facial nerve is, and you see the vasculature coming into the picture. So that's the blood supply. So that is also the point where I expose the nerve, not expose in the sense, not decompress, but I skeletonize the nerve. That is the nerve monitor probe that is being used to. So this thing. Now you see the facial nerve is completely bare. You can actually see the nerve, and this is the blood vessel. No harm if you have not exposed the bone. No harm in coagulating the facial, the blood supply to the facial nerve if you are not exposed bone. Okay, so now that's the facial nerve exposed. Now you see the facial nerve is not exposed. When I say exposed, I'm talking about decompression, not skeletonization, not decompression. Now I go into the nuances of labyrinthectomy. Now here the posterior fossa dura is nicely exposed. Pre-sigmoid dura is exposed. I am drilling on the border of the posterior semicircular canal. Okay, and that is the area where you drill to look for the jugular bulb. Okay, so that is the area of the jugular bulb. Long way to go. Okay, so we are just at the tip of the iceberg. Okay, so that is a little bit of the jugular bulb area again being exposed. Okay, and now you can see the dome of the jugular bulb. Very convenient. This is the spongy bone is occipital bone. This dome of the jugular bulb is low, and it is very convenient for surgery. Even if the mastoid is constricted, you see, if you're very close, one thing I want to tell all of the young people watching this, if you're very close to important structures, no amount of constricted mastoid can restrict your access. Okay, but it takes time, it takes patience. Go close to the fascia. go close to the semicircular. 1 millimeter that you get middle fossa dura, posterior fossa, you remove all the bone. You whatever the difficult translab approach becomes easy. Okay. Now we see in the beginning how small it was. It was a very anterior lying sigmoid, low lying dura. Now you see how much space. It looks like a normal translabyrinthine approach. Okay. Now I'm beginning that labyrinthectomy from the posterior. A lot of times we begin from the lateral canal, but now the posterior canal is nice and nicely seen. But before that, I want to show you how you see you have to get space here under the facial nerve by drilling again very close. Now the posterior semicircular canal goes in a curvilinear fashion, so you'll have to go very close. If you keep a lot of bone here, then again you are restricting your access. Go close, hug the structures, and you'll get a lot of. So now we're doing a labyrinthectomy. Posterior semicircular canal is drilled out. See, and you see the amount of space facial is so far. If there was a lot of bone here, you would be always worried about the facial. Now the facial is absolutely bare, almost ready to be exposed. Okay, so you know that you have a lot of space to do your labyrinthectomy. So that's a posterior canal. Now I am drilling the superior canal. Superior canal is always at a lower plane, remember, than the lateral also. So you'll have to dig a little deep. Here it becomes a problem if the superior semicircular canal is very close to the dura. Okay, here it is not, but in a superior semicircular canal dehiscence, this is the point where you get problems. To go very close, not to injure the dura, not to allow a CSF leak, and then to plug the canal is not always an easy task, because in superior semicircular canal dehiscence, it's always very close to the dura. Okay, so now you see that this is the common crus. Okay, this is the superior canal. There is still a lot of bone to be drilled because we have to push it down. Okay, it's not in the same plane. So this is the posterior canal ampullary end. This is the superior canal here coming like this. This is superior canal. Now I'm drilling under the facial, going around the bulge, the loop, and the ampullary end is actually much deeper. This is the beginning of the ampullary end. Okay. Now I'm coming to the lateral. Before that, you just smoothen it out a little bit. Okay, and then you start drilling the lateral canal and you get the lateral canal. Now the lateral canal is isolated. Again, here also, see on the head of the lateral canal, go close to the nerve, remove this bone now. Okay, remove this. And now at this point, I would like to again tell you that facial nerve point that I said, the dimple is exactly here that. So if you go too deep in the dimple, you'll hit the posterior semicircular canal. So this is the arch. Again, you are now you see the superior canal arch is nicely seen. Now I'm going to identify the ampullary end of the superior canal, because it's very important for me in this case, because it's a translabyrinthine approach. So the ampullary end is also the starting point of the superior ampullary nerve. So for me, it is very important that I go find the ampullary end and preserve the ampullary end till the last. Okay, so this is and then you go. Now you see, now this is the ampullary end of the lateral, non-ampullary end of the lateral, ampullary end of the superior somewhere here, ampullary end of the posterior, non-ampullary end of the posterior is common crus, with the superior which is all gone. Now 1, 2, 3, 4 ampullary, non-ampullary canals have to now go into the vestibule. So you need to make sure that all these ampullary, non-ampullary canals, again you see the facial nerve, you have to hug it. If you leave behind something here, this is also in normal labyrinthectomy. Okay, if you leave behind, you will not see the vestibule clearly, and then you'll end up leaving sensory epithelium in the vestibule, and then you will your vertigo will not. So now you see lateral is all gone, superior little bit is there, posterior is